Hello and welcome to today's class. It is my pleasure today to introduce the speaker for today. It's Srijay Sutar. Some of you probably already know him. He is also TAing for this course, so you might have interacted with him on the discussion forum. Srijay is a doctoral candidate here at IISER Mohali in the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences. For his master's thesis, Srijay studied Dalit and feminist theory and looked at the intersections of debates within the two. And now for his doctoral project, he's doing ethnographic work in Katputli colony in Delhi, looking at intersections of urban justice, right to the city, Lefebvre's right to the city frameworks. He's looking at musicology, the notion of performance. He is working with long-term migrants in Delhi, facing questions of repeated relocation. And in this ethnographic study, he's bringing in a vast repertoire of social theory. He's bringing in queer theory, he's bringing in Dalit and feminist theory, and questions of urban spatial justice. So I think he's the best person to speak to us about Dalit feminism in India. And with that, I hand over the floor to him. Thank you and welcome.
Hi, welcome to this lecture on Dalit feminism in India. In this lecture, we will review and discuss some of the major historical currents that led to the birth of a Dalit feminist movement in the 20th century India, and we will also review some of the key terms that we have discussed in the previous weeks, such as difference, intersectionality, standpoint, and feminism. And we will try to situate these terms within the Dalit feminist movement in India. So let's begin with a brief chronology of events that led up to the happenings of the end of 20th century. So we'll begin shortly and briefly in the 19th century with the Satyashodhak traditions started by Jyotirao Phule that espoused the need for education, for basic human rights, and democratic access to resources for the underprivileged and the deprived groups in the Hindu caste order. So the focus of this tradition, although was mainly Dalit women in Maharashtra, it also backed some support of upper caste women and dispossessed widows. One of the prominent Satyashodhak members was Tarabai Shinde, who writes in her very influential work Shri Purush Tulna, Comparison Between Women and Men. She writes, "Just look now how the custom of not remarrying widows has spread, emphasis on spread, in so many places to so many castes like a great sickness. It's hard to imagine the bitter despair all these hundreds and thousands of widows must suffer, and how many disasters come out of it." In 1888, another prominent writer and social reformer was Pandita Ramabai Saraswati. She was born to a Brahmin family, and she witnessed very strong patriarchal practices and their long-term impacts on women's livelihoods. Her book, High Caste Hindu Woman, was published in 1888, and it talks at length about the caste system and its impact on the so-called lower and upper caste women. It also discusses the Code of Manu, religious orthodoxy, and women's education. I'll read out a small paragraph from her autobiography, which is a translated work from 1907, that says, "Only two things on which all those books, the Dharma Shastras, the sacred epics, the Puranas, and modern poetry, the popular preachers of the present day and orthodox high caste men agreed that women of high and low caste as a class were bad, very bad, worse than demons, as unholy as untruth, and that they could not get moksha as men." Next, we move to one of Ambedkar's most seminal works for caste and gender studies in India, which is Castes in India, Their Mechanism, Genesis and Development, that was published in 1917 as a thesis. So written almost in the style of a thought experiment, Ambedkar hypothesizes a surplus man and a surplus woman under the condition that endogamy is always preserved to underline the mechanism of caste propagation in India. He pens down historical pieces of evidence of this transformation from conventional exogamy to a more sacrilegious endogamy. He finds such evidence in the practice of abominable customs like sati and girl marriage, and hypothesizes that the Brahmin class almost certainly perpetuated the transformation of classes into castes. The work is a very sturdy proof for explaining the Brahminical practices like sati and enforced widowhood for surplus women as a tool to fix the issue of sex ratio imbalance, followed by the loss of a hypothetical husband. That this is the scenario he starts with. So the purpose of maintaining the ratio of marriageable units in society was to perpetuate, stabilize, and fixate a Brahminical homogeneity. In 1925, you had the self-respect movement emerging in Tamil Nadu alongside the non-Brahmin Dravidian movement that was significant in challenging the most immediate form of violence women faced, that was the family. This movement wanted to reconstruct, rebuild, and politicize the domain of family, marriage, and property by orienting really radical changes in them through the introduction of self-respect marriages. So self-respect marriages were executed from 1928 among a myriad of non-Brahmin castes, and it spread up to really remote villages, and the events were regularly reported in the mouthpiece of the movement, the Kuri Arasu. These marriages were a spectacle, and these included marriages of consent, widow remarriages, widower-widow remarriages, and of course intercaste marriages. So the prominent purpose of self-respect marriages was to liberate the institution of marriage from rituals, from Hindu rituals, which emphasized immobility, servitude, and chastity for women through the caste order. Next, in 1927, the very well-known Satyagraha at Mahad, which saw generous participation of Dalit women. Ambedkar's efforts were also quite significant in passing the Bombay legislature's first ever Maternity Benefits Act of 1929 for the protection of Dalit women mine workers. Later, his team in the 1940s was also instrumental in lowering the number of working hours from 14 to 8. In 1936, Ambedkar publishes his undelivered speech, Annihilation of Caste, and he finds the remedy to the caste gender problem in its annihilation. And this annihilation would come from intercaste marriages, the destruction of the belief in the Shastras, the repudiation of the social objective of the Chaturvarnya system, and the state's necessity to regulate priesthood, if not abolish it. In 1940s, the All India Scheduled Castes Women's Federation was formed, and in the 50s, the Hindu Code Bill broke into four separate acts, four separate smaller acts that were passed between 1955 and 56 that modernized Hindu personal law, which covered Hindus, Sikhs, Buddhists, and Jains, and it significantly reformed family law in India, focusing on women's rights covering marriage, succession, adoption, and guardianship. In the 1970s, we saw the Dalit Panthers movement, which was a militant, short-lived, very radical movement inspired by the US Black Panther Party, inspired by Ambedkar, and of course inspired by Marxism. It emerged as a fierce working class and working caste response to rising atrocities on Dalits. Needless to say, it was a male-dominated movement, which also acts as a stimulus for the need for an alternate Dalit female standpoint that we will discuss soon. In 1972 was the Mathura rape case that shook the country to its core, but it was also in this decade that sexual violence was analyzed alongside the lines of caste. In the 80s, saw a steady growth in the number of Dalit women's experiential style of writing through autobiographies, which became quite popular and central to the Dalit feminist movement. In the 1990s, we know the Mandal Commission report was implemented for OBC reservation, and it acted as a crucial catalyst for the development of Dalit feminism by triggering intense debates around caste, gender intersectionality, debates around patriarchal violence, and debates around the limitations of mainstream feminism. It also created, sadly, it also created fundamentalist factions within the women's movement that highlighted a need for a more revivalist notion of feminine purity through ideas of women's roles as mothers, as progenitors, and trustworthy religious defenders of faith. And in 1992, we saw the Bhanwari Devi rape case, which sparked conversations on caste, gender, and violence, which became an epistemological standpoint for Dalit feminism in India to arrive. So while other branches of the women's movement, especially the left, like the All India Democratic Women's Association and the NFIW, the National Federation of Indian Women, which was the CPI's Communist Party of India's women's group to be precise, they were highly organized, and also they highlighted the role of women as economic beings during India's neoliberal turn. These organizations were not caste blind, since a significant portion of its demography and participation was from rural landless workers. One can say that the ideological force of these groups was definitely class struggle and gender oppression, which Dalit feminists would later argue that these conversations could have also been around caste and gender as the ideological focus, which would have been equally valid and in a way more profound and necessary for a more nuanced process of knowledge production. So let's discuss some of the major precursors and historical currents that led to the formation of a Dalit feminist movement. So the post-independent women's movements, the rallying issue was of course violence, which can of course be physical violence, but it can also mean epistemic violence. Therefore, the issues ranged from rapes, domestic violence, female infanticide, sex-selective birth, dowry, landlessness, and the invisibility of women's labor and wage. It is important to note that the caste-gender duo was not an explicit epistemology for a lot of the factions within these movements. Although, as readers and interpreters of feminism, we must realize the perpetual ontological presence of caste in the women's question for the majority of India. So, what were the goals of the post-independence women's movement in India can be said through its epistemology. And therefore, it brings us to the question of who really is the subject of feminism in India. The subject of Indian feminism was not clear and needed a more pluralistic and expansive way of understanding difference and its material transformation into social relations in the family, in the community, and in the state. Similarly, who was the subject of the anti-caste movement? So, alongside the anti-caste movements in the 20th century India, the women's question was quite pertinent, although it experienced more roller coasters than the man's question for sure, which is why that current led to the development of a separate faction, a separate voice that talks differently, as we will see in more articles. These are some images to give you a sense of how divided and factioned post-independence women's movement was in India. There was, for instance, an anti-dowry protests all across the country. Of course, these come from a Brahminical order, but also with the transforming economy. At the same time, you had more fundamentalist factions like the women's group Durga Vahini in the VHP. You also had anti-Mandal factions that opposed the reservation system in government jobs. And then you had Muslim women protesting for alimony in the famous Shah Bano case. So you can see that the post-independence women's movements in India was quite factioned, and even within organizations like the Dalit Panthers, which are not necessarily external to Dalit identity, there were some voices that were missing. So this brings us to a more academic discourse on Dalit feminist scholarship, and we can definitely raise more questions of how Dalit feminism got its epistemology, and we can also question its authenticity in the way these formulations were being written, formulated, and spread across through national federations. So the first scholar is Uma Chakravarti, and the first work, very important, in 1993 was conceptualizing Brahminical patriarchy in early India, gender, caste, class, and state. So very seminal to Dalit feminist epistemology is the understanding of Brahminical patriarchy. This was coined by Uma Chakravarti in 1993. This, however, does not mean that the notion was missing before 1993. As we saw in the case of Ambedkar writing in Caste in India, it was very clear how patriarchy in India was Brahminical and how the caste gender nexus was seminal to the preservation of caste order in India. So she defines this form of patriarchy this form of patriarchy through different forms of control and regulation in the name of preserving the purity of caste that plays a cardinal role in the disempowerment and disenfranchisement of upper caste women in the Hindu social order. Such a form of patriarchy, defined as Brahminical patriarchy, also manifests two distinct forms. One, where upper caste women are sexually regulated, controlled, and restrained, and the other, where lower caste women are constant victims of untouchability, fetishization, and sexual violence. So this Brahminical patriarchy creates a sexual division of labor and also a division of sexual labor, as we will soon discuss when we discuss difference and violence. The next article was in 1995 by Gopal Guru, who wrote a very famous piece called Dalit Women Talk Differently. And the rationale for Dalit women talking differently finds its basis in external factors, which is non-Dalit women homogenizing the issue of Dalit women, and internal factors, which was the patriarchal domination within Dalits. So I'll read out a small paragraph from the essay to give you a sense of his argument on Dalit patriarchy. Besides these external factors, by external factors he means external to the caste, there are certain internal factors that have prompted Dalit women to organize separately vis-a-vis the Dalit men. In the post-Ambedkar period, Dalit leaders have always subordinated and at times suppressed an independent political expression of Dalit women. This political marginalization has been openly condemned by Dalit women at the regional conferences of Dalit women and at the Delhi meet. It is not only in the political arena that Dalit women face exclusion. In the cultural field, for instance, Dalit women have criticized their male counterparts for dominating the literary scene. Dalit male writers do not take serious note of the literary output of Dalit women and tend to be dismissive of it. Dalit women rightly question why they are not considered for the top positions in Dalit literary conferences and institutions. This dissent brings to fore three things. Number one, it is not only caste and class identity but also one's gender positioning that decides the validity of an event. Number two, Dalit women are reproducing the same mechanisms against their women which their high caste adversaries had used to dominate them. And finally, number three, the experience of Dalit women shows that local resistance of Dalit women within the Dalits is important. The whole situation compels us to defend the claim of Dalit women to talk differently, which is justified in the title of this piece. In 1995, we also had the National Federation of Dalit Women being formed, but the work for it began way before in 1985 when Ruth Manorama, who was one of the founding members of the movement, did an approximate and comparative study of the material and social conditions of Dalit women in India and women of color in the West. And she did report some crucial contrasts despite some intrinsic resemblances in women's socioeconomic and political conditions in both these geographies. In 1998, you have Sharmila Rege writing Dalit Women Talk Differently, a critique of difference and towards a Dalit feminist standpoint position as a response to Gopal Guru's article on Dalit Women Talk Differently. So again, I'll elaborate on what she means by a critique of difference. She says, a shift of focus from naming difference or different voice to social relations that convert difference into oppression is imperative for feminist politics. So she says, we shall argue that what we need instead is a shift of focus from difference and multiple voices to the social relations which convert difference into oppression. And she argues for a Dalit feminist standpoint position. Just to refresh your memory on standpoint theory, which you can trace back to Marx, Engels, and Lucas's theory of the proletariat standpoint, that tells us that the negligence of the oppressive and dominant groups in society, the negligence of them questioning their advantaged positions, renders them socially, scientifically, and epistemologically deprived of the generation of complete knowledge. This process is quickened when the proletariat actually gains public voice, when the proletariat gets the mic. So Rege calls for feminists to adopt a Dalit feminist standpoint, and I will elaborate what she means more in the conclusion of her essay. She says the Dalit feminist standpoint, which emerges from the practices and struggles of Dalit women, we recognize may originate in the works of Dalit feminist intellectuals, but it cannot flourish if isolated from the experiences and ideas of other groups who must educate themselves about the histories, the preferred social relations and utopias, and the struggles of the marginalized. A transformation from their cause to our cause is possible, for subjectivities can be transformed. By this, we do not argue that the non-Dalit women non-Dalit feminists can speak as or for the Dalit women, but they can reinvent themselves as Dalit feminists. Such a position, therefore, avoids the narrow alley of direct experience-based authenticity and narrow identity politics. For many of us non-Dalit feminists, such a standpoint is more emancipatory in that it rejects more completely the relations of rule in which we participated, that is, the Brahminical middle-class biases of earlier feminist standpoints come to be interrogated. Thus, adopting a Dalit feminist standpoint position sometimes means losing and revisioning the voice that we as feminists had gained in the 1980s. This process, we believe, is one of transforming individual feminists into oppositional and collective subjects. These are some of the writings of Dalit women in the autobiographical style, and the last one in the poetic style from the 20th and 21st century. And I do encourage you to read at least one of these works that are. Next, we come to the final topic of discussion for today, which is on epistemic violence, which is this systematic destruction and marginalization of certain forms of knowledge. And to look at this, I do want to discuss Swati Arora's text on epistemic exclusion and theorizing Dalit feminism, which is the title of her paper. And she starts the paper by talking about hermeneutical injustice. Hermeneutics is the methodology of interpreting texts, language. It's a philosophy of interpretation of texts, of language, of human actions. And hermeneutical injustice, she says, is a phenomenon that occurs when the interpretative and expressive capacities of marginalized subjects are unfairly undermined. That is, when a gap in collective interpretative resources puts someone at an unfair disadvantage when it comes to making sense of their social experiences. So in the context of Dalit women and Dalit feminist movement, she says, given the extent of Dalit feminist works, its richness, and its influence on legal and social reform in India, it is unfortunate that these works are not cited and their examples are not included in the extensive recent literature on hermeneutical injustice in Anglophone philosophy. She argues that experiential knowledge, which is a very important vessel in the Dalit feminist movement, is deeply undervalued in Anglophone and Brahminical philosophy, and thereby stifling insights that might be sparked by engagement with accounts of lived experience. So, Dalit feminist literature and consciousness has historically been undermined through epistemic violence and hermeneutical injustice. This is also evident in the 1974 Towards Equality report, for instance, that emerged from a more Brahminical social and intellectual milieu that failed to see the caste-gender intersectionality and nexus. This is epistemic violence. Some final takeaways from this lecture should be that the realization of patriarchy in India as Brahminical patriarchy was a revolutionary epistemological contribution. This form of patriarchy, like we discussed, produces both a sexual division of labor between man and woman and also division of sexual labor between the upper caste woman and the lower caste woman. So next, Gopal Guru observes that Dalit patriarchy harms Dalit women through two distinct dynamics. First, Dalit men themselves, brutalized by the caste system, can internalize its oppressive logic and redirect it against Dalit women, therefore perpetuating the violence within their own communities. Second, as Dalit communities achieve a certain degree of social mobility and improve status, men may consciously emulate the upper caste, which is the self-proclaimed elite. Men may consciously emulate the upper caste Sanskritic norms and therefore adopt their patriarchal practices of controlling and subjugating women as a marker of this new aspirational, mobile, upward social position. And then Rege's contribution, alongside with Ambedkar, of course, shows that caste and gender are actually inseparable, and it is also simultaneously applicable to Dalit patriarchy, as all of these authors show. So therefore, there has to be a redistribution of epistemic authority to move towards a more caste conscious, a more class conscious feminism under existing market forces of capitalism. So we will end here, and these are some of the recommended readings for this lecture. Thank you.